Hello, this is Robert Rickover, and I'm doing a little experiment with Imogen Ragone. Imogen's an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. I teach in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Toronto, Canada. And we're going to be exploring a new idea around the head-neck relationship. That is going to probably seem rather controversial to some people, but we're just going to dive right into it. You notice, if those of you who followed Imogen on her posts on her Body Learning Facebook page and previous experiments, Body Intelligence Facebook page, and previous work that we've done along these lines, that there's something a little different about her hairdo today. She's got her hair up, and there's a reason for that, which will become somewhat apparent. So I want to just say a word or two about the head-neck relationship in general. Obviously, everyone in the Alexander world knows that's pretty important. Relationship to attend to. Alexander referred to it as primary control. And the directions around that are typically something along the lines of, I guess Alexander would have said neck free, head to move forward and up, back to lengthen and widen, something like that. I would prefer saying my neck is free. I think that's a little better direction. But the general idea is that you want your neck to be free, and you want to have your head have the ability to release forward around a certain axis, which we're going to explore briefly, and up. So Imogen, I'm sure you've taught students where their head is on top of their spine.
I have given them a general
idea. And if I put, there are these little grooves behind your earlobes, which I tend to focus on as approximation. But if you put a little fingertip into each of those grooves, right in the middle is where your head rests on top of your spine. And it's resting on C1, the top vertebrae. And of course, most people don't have that mapped very well, and it's very helpful to let people know where that is and to explore using it. Now, typically, I'll just say that someone like Patrick McDonald, I remember once reading something of his where he talks about forward and up, and he says, well, there is a little bit of a movement there. It's not no movement at all. And I think his take on it, which I think might be a fairly common one, is that the forward, which is a forward rotation around that line, he I believe, said the little forward release is what unlocks this joint and allows the head to ease up. And I think that would resonate with a lot of Alexander teachers. Does it sort of resonate with you a little bit?
It does. I remember my teacher telling me that we actually have this sort of writing reflex, and it's always going on.
Yeah. It's always going on, but it may be interfered with.
Well, yes.
And the way it gets interfered with is tightening, often tension in the neck, especially the back and the sides. And hence the direction my neck is free or something like that. I've been experimenting with a variation on that, and that's what I'd like to explore today. So if you would indulge our viewers and turn sideways to the camera just for a little bit here, this is going to make it a lot easier to see what we're talking about. So if you could just first, I know, and I will say, in Imogen's defense, she has no idea where we're going with this. You can attest to that. Good. So if you would, again, maybe just put your fingers there to indicate that imaginary line, good. And just mentally connect with that line. Maybe bring your arms back down on your lap. What I'd like you to do is follow this particular instruction. I'd like you to say, I'm free to move that line straight back, and actually move it straight back in space even. You're actually pulling something back. I'm free to pull that line back. Good. And now switch over to I'm free. What did you notice happened when you switched over to I'm free?
Well, that's a direction or thought I use a lot. And I definitely noticed when I switched to I'm free that things released.
But you noticed that something happened when you pulled that line back as well,
yeah,
right?
I felt there was some tension.
A little bit of, it was work. It was actual work, and you were taking your head in a somewhat unfamiliar location, right? Mm-hmm. But go ahead and do that once again. The reason why I think it's nice to say I'm free to pull it back as you're pulling it back is you're going to minimize the amount of unhelpful tension. So I'm free to pull that line back in space.
I've done that.
And now I've done the pulling back, and so I'm free. I don't have to pull it back anymore. There was a little adjustment when you went to I'm free. But does that seem like a different setup than when you started? That's the question.
I think so, a little bit.
You might experiment with this, pulling it back as far as you can without it being really uncomfortable. So
Definitely something's changing when I'm pulling it back, whether I'm free to pull it back or however.
Right.
And definitely things change and release when I think I'm free.
Right.
But I'm not sure what the difference is between before I started at all.
Okay, and we're going to test that in a moment. But let's see about I'm free to pull that line straight back quite a bit, a little bit beyond your comfort zone even, right?
Not a good place.
No, and now just shift over to I'm free. So you're not doing any pulling anymore. But it looks to me like your head is not where it was when you started.
That's quite possible.
Huh?
I said that's quite possible. It feels
different. Okay, now let's do a little experiment with whether that was a useful change or not. If presumably, if it was useful, I think people have seen enough of you from the side. You could come face forward and you could let your hair down if you feel like it.
Wow.
Yeah. Opportunity here. Good. Okay, here's the Imogen we all know and love. Okay, so let's do it this way. Just nod your head forward and backward as far as it will comfortably go.
So,
right. And then just make a note of what that range was, some idea of that range. And now, with that imaginary line, I'm free to pull it straight back in space. I'm free. And now rotate your head forward and backward in that new relationship. And see if there's any difference in the range.
I think I lost it a bit the second time, but the first time I did it, I was definitely moving from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the range that seemed more different in some way,
Okay,
looking up.
let's do another experiment. Just so you know that this line represents the line of rotation of your head, right? Now, if you wanted to rotate your head sideways, if you would imagine a line that intersects this one, so it's just at right angles to this one, and you could just say, well, I'm rotating my head around that line, and see how far you can easily move your head. No, don't push the limits, just get a sense of what the easy range is. Okay, you got that? Now do the same thing. I'm free to pull that line, that axis of forward and backwards rotation, straight back. And now I'm free. And now rotate your head from side to side in this new area. Yeah.
I kind of lost it a bit because I was so sort of surprised. But yeah, I really noticed it going to, and I'm have a little bit less range to the left, just from my own patterns and.
Right. So what's this all about? Let's talk about why are we doing this? I think most Alexander teachers have had the experience when they're working with a student and they put their hands on the student's neck and guide them into a little release of tension in their neck, that the biggest thing that happens often, and what a student will often comment on, when you say, what if you ask him or her what did they notice, they'll say, my head went back, right? And my line was always, yes, your head did go back in space, but relative to your torso, it actually rotated a little forward. And I would go into some of the mechanics of that. But really the most obvious change that often happens is a backward movement of the head. And we're talking about people whose neck tension pattern tends to involve some pushing of their head and neck forward, as opposed to just straight tightening without.
I mean, obviously that is far the most common pattern.
Very much so.
It actually might be that way.
You do get people who just do that, and you get some people who just pull it straight down. Like that. I mean, it's tough to do, but there are people capable of like that. But mostly people, typical thing of sitting at a computer, you're looking at the screen, and pretty much before you know it, your head's and neck together, and even upper part of your torso is being pushed forward, and there's a kind of a downward component too, like that. So this idea of pulling the head back, of course, this sounds very heretical, I think. I can imagine a lot of Alexander teachers really being upset by this. But I would say that yes, you are pulling your head back for a brief period of time, but you're going to a new location and then you're letting the system, you're just asking for freedom. You're not asking to continue doing any pulling. And I think in principle, that's not really that different from if you're working with a student who wants to work on lifting their arm with ease. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're lifting, they're doing something, and you want to show them how to do that more easily. I think to say I'm free to pull my head, that line, we could call it C0 almost. I mean, it's like the end of the line of the spine, and the head rests on these two little grooves in C1. To do that and then just shift over to I'm free, I find that I definitely seem to be taller. I believe I am taller when I do that. And I find that I have greater mobility, particularly for me anyway, in the forward direction. The backward part seems about the same. And I've done quite a few experiments of side to side, this kind of movement. And it does seem as though the range increases. And we might want to do one more experiment with this.
Sure.
So, you ready for this? I'm free to pull my C0 line, you could call it, or just the line that runs through here. I'm free to pull it back. I'm free. Now just notice your breathing. Just be aware of it. And then go back into your more habitual way of sitting. Just allow yourself to go back into whatever patterns you might typically have. And can you sense a difference in your breathing?
Well, that's interesting. The one thing I noticed, and it probably happened quite a lot, but I specifically noticed it that time, was when we moved from the pulling back to just I'm free, that I spontaneously got a deeper breath, which often happens when I really, do some sort of thinking that's helpful.
Right.
But then, you told me to be aware of my breath, and it did seem like quite moving quite freely through. I don't know how to say it, but it's possible it was a little deeper or more free than when I went to my normal place, which I would hope my normal place isn't too bad, having the Alexander technique for 20 years.
So there might not be a big difference.
Yeah.
I also have found, I found that my breathing is a little freer when I'm up at that little higher, it's actually basically a little higher up.
Well, it would make sense because then this has all got a little bit more space to move. And
yeah. And the other thing that you might want to experiment on your own, and I've done a bit of this, is to have some sort of a sound that you can make. I like to explore using humming, where you would have a little tune that you can hum, and take the humming right into this pulling back of this line, and then I'm free, no more pulling, continue humming, and then go back to just nothing, just whatever my current habit is. And I find that the quality of the sound gets a little restricted compared to when it's up here. Now, I began these experiments, I have to say, in the steam room of the club where I swim every day. And they have this nice steam room, and you can sit quite all the way back on a tile chair, and there's a tile wall right behind you, and I can just pull right back into my head, either touching or almost touching that tile wall. And I have the sensation of being shockingly tall when I do that. But also, once I let go of the actual pulling back and just go into I'm free, I also have a sensation of more ease in this area and just generally more expansion. So I think this is somewhat related to a recent discussion on Facebook about the meaning of back, that direction that some teachers use, particularly McDonald teachers, I think. I'm developing a whole theory about what back really means, But I think this is part of it. I think there's some specific parts of your back or specific rearrangements of this and inside your torso that are exactly what that back is, and comes right out of, here I'm speculating, but I think it's true, it comes out of the Delsarte method. It's very much a Delsarte thing to modify your torso in various ways. And Alexander was, we know, a Delsarte teacher for some time. So that's the experiment. Yeah, you were going to say something.
I have a question. I mean, I think I know the answer because of what you've been presenting, but do you think this addition is maybe not necessary, but help getting to somewhere that through our own direction and constructive thinking that we're not going to just find on our own? I apologize for that.
It's probably someone calling in to complain. So you were saying, though.
Oh, sorry.
About.
Do you think that you would not get there on your own with just your own directions and constructive thinking, that this extra piece is necessary, or at least speeds up the process?
I don't know, because I haven't really worked with students other than you just now, and my colleague John Macy in Omaha. We've experimented with. I think it can certainly be taught without hands-on, as we just did. That's part of it. And John makes the point when I showed him this. He said, "Well, you know." And by the way, you notice when you pull this back, whatever else was going on, there was no lifting of your chest, right?
True. Yeah, true.
You weren't trying to get your head up this way.
Tension sort of back here.
Right. And for me, I mean, I know that I've got a certain amount of arthritis in my neck and upper torso. So when I do this, I'm kind of pushing some limits about what's available, because I very much am the kind of person that would tend to have that head neck forward misuse pattern. And there's a certain extent to which I may never be able to really get things in this region going quite as well as they might, just, you know, in internal limitations. But I do have the sense that I'm making the best use of this myself when I do this. And I find I use it when I'm driving a lot. Whenever I think about it, I do it. And it does seem to have actually helped me quite a bit. And I thought it was, you know, worth exploring in a video. John points out an obvious fact, that there is no way that you can make your head go up by sheer force of will on the head itself. There's no muscle that can pull it up. But when you pull this line back, you are in space, you are probably also pulling your head back relative to your neck a bit. And there's those little grooves in C1 that would cause your head to actually rise up a bit. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, if you believe the up of forward and up is really just your head responding to the upward push of the earth or the chair or whatever your support is. And that if your head is pushed forward like this, you're not really getting that up in the most efficient way. Whereas if the whole, because the up has to travel through your whole body to get to your head, or if you're sitting through your torso to get to your head. So I tend to look at it as getting my head in a place where it can actually receive the upward force of the earth, which we haven't, we're not going to go into here, but there are plenty of podcasts and we've discussed this before. I mean, I think the forward and up is the fact that the center of gravity of your head, which is here, is forward of the support point. So your head's always tending to tilt forward. And the up is just what's coming from the earth. You're getting an upward push from you having distorted the surface you're sitting on. It wants to restore it, all the stuff that we've talked about. So that's how I see it mainly. But I think this is, if you're watching this and you're a teacher or if you're a student, give it a try. The key is be very clear, first of all, where this line is. Okay, it's right at it runs right through you, and right in the middle is the middle of C1, and your head rests on top of that. I mean, this is the top of C1. This is, some chiropractors I know call it C0. It's like the head C1 connection. So that's about all I have to say on this. I think it's worth exploring.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. I would just say, if anyone is experiencing and they're not teachers or experienced with the Alexander technique already, if they are having neck pain or tension problems, this is probably not the best experiment, because you'd probably be adding to.
Yeah, you want to be very clear that this backward movement, you first of all don't want to take it so far that you're really, you don't want to, you want to be, you'd be safer having very small pullbacks to start with, like this, very subtle, instead of all the way back. I mean,
I just say that because that was my big issue, and I could just do so much.
This is not about powering through limitations. It's about releasing tension, and the two are quite different.
Absolutely.
So I think that's it, unless you have any questions.
Oh, it's fascinating. Thank you, Robert.